Aaron, you here?
I'm I'm here, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Say hello to Emma.
Hey, Emma.
Hey, Aaron.
You've been such a great addition to the show. So happy to be on while you're here.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Happy to
Wow.
have you on. Yeah. After Sam commanded you say hello to me.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a new
right.
thing. Muscle.
That's right. Now, thank you for behaving, Aaron. I appreciate that. That was very appropriate
You
of
get
you.
a
You're
cookie.
getting very your manners are getting excellent. Now, all right. So, Aaron, I got a couple of things I want to talk to you about. I want to look back a little bit on what happened in November, a little bit, but first I want to look forward. You guys have just launched this new what is it, like a project?
Blog. We're
Blog.
bringing back blogging.
I've never heard of that, vlogging.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
What was
yes,
it down the line? What is that? Is that a reference to the redistricting?
it is. Using one of my favorite Jerry Rafferty lyrics to do a blog about redistricting. Redistricting is the most important voting rights issue right now, and it is a process that is run at the state level. So at Future Now, and people can obviously visit the blog at our site, futurenow.org, we know states. And so what we're going to do is we are going to walk people through what's going to happen in all 50 states, what their processes are for redistricting, what people can look for, what the range of potential outcomes would be, and ways that people might want to get involved as well, because redistricting and gerrymandering in particular really relies on the public being shut out. And so when there are points of leverage for the public to have their voice heard, they really need to use them, because it actually can have an impact down the line, if especially if there's litigation, because when maps get litigated, they take evidence from public hearings into account.
All right, this is very important stuff, and I think that states, the Democrats broadly speaking, the left broadly speaking, has, I think, got caught flat-footed on the state level. We've probably talked about this in the past. In many respects, Future Now is a response to that. But in 2010, the that midterm election ended up like having such ripple effects because of what happened in state houses, and the combination of Republicans taking over in many state houses, three chambers essentially, if you will, or two chambers in the executive, and technology bumping up at that point and being able to sort of like specifically gerrymander in a way. We're seeing the impact of that still dramatically.
Yeah.
Where we have multiple states. I mean, tell us a couple of the states that are like where you see it the most, because where you have like 55% of the people vote for Democrats in the state, yet the state house has 60% representation of Republicans.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin is the most egregious example. The measure of what you're talking about is proportionality, which is basically whether the makeup of a state legislature is proportional to the vote for the state legislature. And the best way, I think, to measure that is the difference between the statewide outcome and what the outcome was in the median district. And in Wisconsin, the outcome in a median district, that is to get a majority, the 50th district there, because there are 99 districts, was 11 points more Republican than the state as a whole. Biden won the state by about a percentage point. The median state house district there voted for Trump by 10 points. And that's how, so Wisconsin Democrats, if they want to win a majority in the state assembly, would have to win the statewide vote by 11 points more than they did in 2020. That is a far more effective tool at disenfranchising people than any voter ID restriction or anything like that. It's, obviously, making sure that people can actually vote is very important, but, kind of corrupt special interests really rely on gerrymandering to make it so that state legislators don't have to appeal to median voters. They're only appealing to bases, and they're only being funded by, again, if you've seen what happened in Wisconsin the past 10 years, it's because of that legislative map that they were able to do that.
And to be clear, if I know that there's a new voter ID measure in any given state, at least there's an opportunity for me to organize and try and get as many people as I can some type of ID. But once those lines are drawn, it's Johnny Ball.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things where, one of the things that Republicans, their goals are when they pass voting restrictions, even if Democrats can overcome them, they can still force Democrats to spend a lot of resources overcoming them. There's no kind of way for you to just throw money at the problem of unfair lines. And so that's why it's so pernicious. And again, because we're in this, we just had the census, we finally have those numbers out. This is, our once in a decade chance for a lot of places to really affect those lines. There is some litigation that, eventually can change lines mid-decade, but most of the legislative lines that are going to govern this country for the next decade will be drawn in the next year or so.
And that's what I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's just what makes the PRO Act so imperative, right? I mean, I'm sorry, not the PRO Act, S1, HR1.
Yeah.
So can you talk about how that legislation would target some of these dynamics that you're bringing up here?
Absolutely. So HR1, I can't speak to the whole thing, but I have looked at the redistricting portions. I would say, there is a way to write HR1 in a way that, first of all, imposes less of a burden on this. It's a little more kind of process focused. And I think one of the most important things that I really hope is maintained throughout it is, they do have a kind of a proportionality metric there, so they can force states to draw proportional districts. And if they did that at the federal level, I'm still running through scenarios of what would happen. But right now, my estimate is that it would create 15 to 20 more districts that went for Biden than if the process plays out as it would, kind of as expected this cycle. So, I mean, that would be huge at the federal level. And at the state level, HR1 would be amazing because, they do have constitutional authority to require states to draw legislators that have proportional representation. You can't pass federal law saying, Wisconsin, you have to draw your state legislative lines in a way that, kind of somewhat reflects the median voter of the state. And another thing is, even if HR1 doesn't advance at the federal level, there are still actions that states can take. In Virginia, for example, when Democrats took over, they actually gave up redistricting power and punted it to a commission. And we've seen that in a lot of states where you kind of get out majorities that are kind of focused on narrow special interests. You get in majorities that are focused on the people, and they're willing to give up that power because in a lot of these states, they're not afraid of a fair fight. And I think that, if you have faith in your ideas as a political party, you shouldn't be afraid of a fair fight.
Yeah, well, fat chance on that
Right.
one. I mean, all right. Well, all right. So let's go over and we should be clear here, right? There's the state legislative districts don't always align with the congressional districts, do they? I mean, I know specifically I'm thinking Pennsylvania because the congressional districts were fixed by a lawsuit. The state ones weren't. And I'm still not 100% clear on what inhibited the state districts from being challenged as well. But with all that said, where are the states? And I know you're going to go through all the states and on your blog, and there's a different story in every state in many respects. But where are the ones? Where are the big sort of fires? Where's if I wanted to, if I recently divorced Bill Gates and had the ability and contribute to certain areas, like where would be the ones where I would, if I said I want to put out the biggest fires, where would they be?
So Melinda Gates, if you're watching, futurenow.org, we're happy to talk to you about how you can improve lives at the state level. One state I think that will be really critical is one that you mentioned, Pennsylvania. And so the reason why that happened was actually at the legislative level, the Supreme Court appoints the tiebreaker for a commission that draws state legislative lines, where the congressional lines are just drawn as a statute, and so it goes legislature to governor. I think probably some internal politics there, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, for the first time in 3 decades during a redistricting cycle, is controlled by Democrats. The last 2 times they had state legislative lines drawn, it was kind of a Republican former judge was appointed as a tiebreaker on the commission. They drew Republican lines, and in Pennsylvania, the state house, the median district is 4 points more Republican than the state as a whole. Which so if Democrats wanted to take back the state house last year, which they tried, they still have had to flip Trump districts, even though Biden won the state. But this time, they actually yesterday appointed former Pitt chancellor, who's a political science professor who knows his stuff. And the hope is that Democrats and Republicans, if they want, they can appeal to him by coming to him with a fair map that reflects the state politically. Hopefully, he would approve that on the commission. And the hope is that going into 2022, Pennsylvania Democrats will be able to run on fair lines for the legislature. And even we look at the 2022 election. We all know that midterm elections tend to favor the party that's out of the White House. But in Pennsylvania, you could have a 4-point shift toward the Democrats just based on the map alone. And so there still might be opportunities there.
And just clear, when we say a 4-point shift, we're just talking about going back to zero, essentially.
Basically, yeah.
Where it's like just the lines are neutral and they let the voters decide rather than the lines sort of decide which voters they're going to allow to decide.
Yeah. It's in Pennsylvania, it means that Democrats can try to orient their platform and their policies toward the electorate of Pennsylvania, not the electorate of Ohio, and that's a really, that's a big distinction. It can make a big difference. So Pennsylvania is
anything wrong with Ohio?
Not there's anything wrong with it, but it's more conservative than Pennsylvania.
I'm saying in terms of people.
In terms of, no, absolutely not. But you want to make sure that when people are running for office, they're running to appeal to the, really the median of their state.
Sam, that was a bit looking into his mind about truly Ohio, probably.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't disparaging Ohioans.
And I love Ohio, and actually Ohio has a chance for fair districts too, which is great as well. They actually have the most convoluted process of any state, but even if Republicans can basically try to stall it and try to pass lines on their own, they still have a fairness requirement, and their state Supreme Court seems like it would uphold it. So in Ohio, lines should improve. And again, Ohio was one of the most gerrymandered states coming out of the last census. Their entire congressional delegation, I know we're changing from state legislatures here a bit, their entire congressional delegation has been 12-4 Republican the entire decade. Not a single seat has changed hands.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so that's Ohio and Pennsylvania. Where else are you guys where else do you guys see the other biggest sort of issues happening or potential?
So Texas is a really interesting one. Republicans have unified control of government there, but there's been a delay in the census results that comes out of Trump's mismanagement and the COVID pandemic, where the states aren't going to get the data that they need to actually draw districts until August or September. So in the Texas Constitution, there are two really important dates. The legislature goes out of session on July 15th, and there's the candidate filing deadlines in December. So that means they would have to try to call a special session. Democrats would have some leverage over what a special session would look like, even though they're not, because there's a 2/3 majority required to really kind of convene one. And so Democrats may actually have some leverage over the Texas map, but that nothing would prohibit Texas Republicans from having like a court-drawn map, say if it comes to that in 2022. If they maintain their legislative majorities in the governorship, they could go back in 2023 and redraw the lines. They did it before in 2003. I'm sure you remember that, the Killer D's in Texas. So again, it just highlights that really this process takes place at the state level. And when you're talking about the Texas congressional map, the difference between a court-drawn map and a Republican gerrymander might be something like 5 seats for Democrats. So again, like the state of Texas's government is hugely important, not just for people living in Texas, but for people across the country.
And Texas had, and the timing of this, I can't necessarily remember when it was, but this became like an issue at the Supreme Court. And actually one of the rulings about racist lines drawn, essentially, it's a rather convoluted result, but it was basically like the Texas legislature drew lines that the Supreme Court found to be racist. Then the next Texas legislature, when it had to adopt new lines, didn't redraw the lines. They just took the lines that were drawn the first time, and they were okayed by the Supreme Court because that legislature didn't draw them, so they couldn't have drawn them with racist intent. They just absorbed them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. I know that sounds nuts to people, but that's why people were screaming about it, essentially, because it's not.
And, again, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 still should protect lines in some states. But as you saw in that case and many others, it has been eroded over time. Though, again, in 2019, there was still a case where a narrow majority on the court, one that may not exist today, but one then, threw out Virginia state legislative lines for unnecessarily packing Black voters. And that might actually have an impact going forward, that case, because if you draw a district that is more than like 55 or 60% Black, that might no longer be constitutional if that can be avoided, because it might be unconstitutionally packed. So that's something to look forward to. And in that case, there might actually be some fruits, like in Alabama, for example. That case might make it so that you actually have to draw a congressional map where there are 2 majority Black districts instead of 1. So in Alabama, you might actually get improved lines. So yeah, the courts will play a big role.
What other state? Texas, Pennsylvania. Is there one other state that you're looking at that is going to be key in your mind?
North Carolina is one that I'm kind of looking at with bated breath. They have an early deadline like Texas in December. And they have a Republican legislature, and the governor can't veto it. But they do have a 4-3 Democratic majority on the state Supreme Court. And that state Supreme Court has thrown out partisan gerrymanders before. I think the big question is how far will, but they are deferential somewhat to the legislature. So to me, the question is, how far will Republicans go? Kind of how far will they push the envelope on that? If they push it too far, they risk the state Supreme Court overturning it. And so I think that's a state where, you'd really want to see Democrats united against the map. So, it causes less deference from the court that's a big, process point there, is just making sure that people are united, people are really pushing for a proportional map, because North Carolina is another state. Democrats got 49% of the state house vote. They got 43% of the state house seats. And so I think it's a state where you would hope that, people in the state really become united for a map that reflects the state politically, and the hope that the state Supreme Court would enforce that.
How is your approach changing given the 2020 census? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the census was actually a big surprise, because you saw 3 Sun Belt states, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, not gain seats. And you saw some northeastern states, like New York only lost 1 seat, and they barely lost it. They were at risk. We were at risk for losing 2. And then Rhode Island kept both of its seats. Now, all 5 of those states have significant Latino populations. But New York and Rhode Island actually invested in outreach to Latino communities for the census. And those 3 Sunbelt states, which are all run by Republicans, did not. And so that has changed. So, I think people are worried that there may be, especially in Sunbelt states, a Latino undercount. And I don't know to what extent that might be litigated, but that certainly has implications across all districts. Because if Latino voters are undercounted, I think at the, certainly at the federal level, it means less clout for really kind of Republican-leaning states. Except, Arizona's kind of totally a swing state now, but Florida and Texas still lean somewhat Republican. But it might end, we have to be vigilant for making sure that, line drawers in those states don't, basically pack Latino voters unconstitutionally, especially because they might have been undercounted.
I know the answer to this, but I got to ask, why in the world would any state, but a Republican state, why would they undercount their own citizens? I mean, is it just like, is it just sheer idiocy mixed with like a tinge of racism, or is it like sheer racism mixed with a tinge of idiocy?
I can't speak to their motive. I mean, I think a lot of them are devoted to an ideological project that's just anti-government at all costs. And it leads them to do things that are against their own. I mean, the census doesn't just determine your congressional representation. Trillions of dollars of federal money moves based on census numbers. When you invest in your state in census outreach, that pays for itself.
Yeah.
If you get the people living in your state counted, that means that that gets paid back. New York did a good job of it, Raleigh did a good job of it, and now they reap the benefits of it. And so, again, you want to elect people at the state level who will actually invest in your state. Again, spending public money, it's not throwing money. That's the thing that a lot of people don't get. Spending public money isn't throwing money down the drain. Census outreach literally pays for itself over so many multiple times. So,
all right, one final question. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Aaron, but I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't spoken since November. I mean, I can't remember. We may have, and if we did, and maybe this is the second time I'm putting you on the spot. What happened?
So the good news is you're asking me this 6 months later when we've had a bit more time to figure out what happened.
Well, that was my plan.
Yeah.
Data yet? I mean, you got the data. What happened?
So there are a few things that I think we saw. One is polls continue to, the people responding to them tend to overrepresent people who might vote Democratic. And I think there's a lot of work being done. But because the polls, I mean, the AAPSC and all these other groups, they realize, okay, something went wrong. We're trying to fix it. And, so I've seen a bunch of them trying to figure out, okay, that happened. I think candidates not being able to go door to door on the Democratic side, especially for, at the state legislative level, where again, if you can knock on 2,000 swing voters' doors, that makes such a huge difference. And we saw that candidates who, went out and door knocked anyway. I mean, some of them really, did better than we might think. And Republicans candidates really didn't have any compunctions about going door to door. And I think that ended up really harming at the state legislative level as well. COVID, I don't know about you guys, but I think COVID kind of just drove everyone a little crazy. And I think that's kind of hard to capture. I think people got kind of more isolated, more insular. My hope is that, again, we can kind of really kind of be able to reach out to people more, kind of, and again, it's we saw so many cases of COVID, someone losing their job, having a business shut down, and then all of a sudden going, spending 20 hours a day on YouTube.
Yeah.
I think that might have been a problem as well. And so all two of those things are really COVID specific. And, hopefully, I think the polling thing, people are working on it, but and also polls tend to have been better when Trump isn't on the ballot. I think he just brings out a type of person that's hard to reach. It'll be interesting to see. And I think that's the big question looming over politics right now for the next decade. The two things looming over politics over this decade: one, what happens to those Trump voters? And two, what are those lines going to look like? So if you're curious about the second one, futurenow.org, down the line, every week we'll be updating you on kind of what the process is in every state and what you can look for in redistricting.
And what folks can do in terms of pressuring and getting the sense that the lawmakers are being watched.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because again, in the past, they have really relied on a closed process that people didn't pay attention to gerrymander. Even if there's no real political leverage in the state, huge Republican trifectas, just shining some light on it, it can really help. Just again, building the record against it, maybe in litigation, in the future, and just mobilizing people and letting lawmakers know, hey, this actually is something that matters. This isn't inside baseball. People want a government that represents them.
Aaron Kleinman, Director of Research, Future Now, and with your new blog, what is it? Down the Line.
Down the Line, your favorite Jerry Rafferty song, everyone. Go to futurenow.org. Click on down.
I'm the only person who knows what you're talking about. Jerry Rafferty. I'm the only person. Everybody else is younger than that. You're younger than that. I don't know why you're listening to that kind of music anyways.
Yeah, my dad had some old vinyl. He had it lying around the house.
Exactly. That was a song that was a contemporary for me when I was a kid.
Don't be
All right,
shamed
goodbye,
into listening to old music. I do it too.
All right,
Into
Aaron.
Not doing so.
You're the only person I've ever heard of named a blog after a Jerry Rafferty song. All right. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, bye.
The Jerry Rafferty song.